Wouldn't it be amazing to have a crystal ball that you could look into and discern what your life teaching overseas might be like? Even for the veterans in the crowd, being privy to the array of opportunities that might arise when teaching overseas would be a real boon. Well, this show provides the next best thing. We have brought together a panel of veteran international educators to share their experiences living and teaching internationally. Let me introduce each of our panel members. Apologies if this takes a minute. Their bios reflect the rich variety of their experiences. David Ross is a retired 58-year-old international educator. He began teaching elementary school in Los Angeles, then moved to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia with his family to teach at ISKL for 6 years. He then took a 1-year sabbatical with his family to bike across Europe and ended up in Saigon, Vietnam. He taught for 9 years at SSIS and coached middle and high school men's volleyball. He enjoys scuba diving, free diving, playing in a band, pickleball, staying fit, and cooking. He's also been a proactive investor and proponent of financial literacy. Rob Howe is a 56-year-old business professional and international educator. He began his career in the technology industry. After a 1.5-year sabbatical from work, he met his wife, an international teacher, and decided to become one. His first opportunity was in Jakarta, Indonesia, for 2 years at NJIS. He then returned to the USA, started a new career in sustainability consulting, and adopted 2 children from India. In 2014, he returned to overseas teaching. Posts included Beirut, Lebanon, Harare, Zimbabwe, and Saigon, Vietnam. Amy Hunt is currently teaching psychology and science of mind at Nueva School in the San Francisco Bay Area. After spending a year in outdoor education in 1987, Amy left the U.S. at age 25 to teach IB English in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where she met her husband, Lee Fertig. They moved together to Rio, where Amy also began teaching IB theory of knowledge, then back to the U.S., followed by stints in Barcelona, São Paulo, and Brussels before returning to the U.S. in 2020. A curious risk-taker and boundary stretcher, Amy is also a yoga therapist. She reads a lot, loves murder shows and pickleball, takes hikes and cold plunges, and tries to coax her 3 20-something children to fly the nest. Please enjoy reading the full bios of our veterans in the show notes. In this show, you'll hear about our highs, lows, and various twists and turns in our pathways as we share lessons learned through being part of the incredible, close-knit community of international educators. Sit back and enjoy tales of adventure from Rob, Amy, and David, and gain myriad insights into what makes this lifestyle so very special. This show was recorded on October 16th, 2024. We now present our courageous, curious, adventurous panel of veterans.
Hello, friends. And when I say friends, I mean we have a lot of friends on this special episode that I've really been looking forward to. So let's do a quick welcome and find out where in the world everyone is. First, let's start off with Amy. Amy, where are you?
I'm in San Francisco Bay Area.
Excellent. And Rob?
I'm in Tucson, Arizona.
Nice. And David D. Ross, where are you?
I am just south of Los Angeles in Orange County, California.
Orange County. And for logistics, this made it pretty easy to line everyone up with the 3 of you in Pacific time and me in Boise just an hour away. And Audrey, where are you, Audrey?
I'm in Kathmandu, Nepal.
Yay.
So it's early morning for me, evening for y'all.
All right. So you all must have so many different stories that you can share. So we want to focus on your going global story of how you got your start as an international educator. So why don't we go with David? And we're going to go for David Ross, David, and for me, Dave Carpenter. So we'll just go Dave and David. So David, what is your story?
Well, I'll try to keep it brief. And that was around about 2006. My spouse and my two small kids, we were looking for a change because we were working in, I won't say the school district, but we were working somewhere in California teaching in elementary. And after 10 years or so, we were looking for a change. And so we couldn't find it close by. And we decided to take a sabbatical in Southeast Asia for about 6 months. And before long, I think we were into our first week, maybe second or third week. And we met some people on the island of Koh Samui in Thailand. And this gentleman we met at the pool, he had a Southern accent. And we found out he worked in Kunming, China. And so we went, what are you doing there? And he told us about international teaching, and he gave us some names and even a card of somebody we could call. And next thing we knew, we were making contacts with people in IRCOS. It's that group of schools in Southeast Asia. And next thing we knew, we got a job in Malaysia as international school teachers and packed up our place in California and didn't look back.
Holy cow. Well, it makes sense. You were already overseas. You're taking time off. Kind of a adventuresome family, which, because I know you are that type of people. It makes sense that you would find yourselves as international educators. Rob, how about you?
Yeah, I didn't have someone that I didn't know. It was actually my wife-to-be in 2000, this would be 2002, started showing me pictures and photos. And she was an international school teacher, and she'd been in Indonesia. And so after looking at the pictures, and this was, after 2001 in the US, we'd had a tech crash and a lot of people were out of work, and I had been unemployed. I'd been in technology sales. And so I started seeing her pictures, hearing her stories. Before I knew it, I was, studying to get a master's of education. And in 2004, we got married, and then there was a last minute opportunity that came through for the school in Indonesia, and we were off. So that's how it all started.
Wow, you made a double leap, marriage and going global.
Double
That's
leap,
cool.
all within 2 months.
All right, Amy, how about you?
Well, my story's a little bit different. I was really young. I graduated from college with English and psychology majors. And it took me about a year before I realized I wanted to be a teacher, went back to school, got a master's in teaching. And I knew that I didn't want to just go teach public school. And anyways, in 1986, there weren't any jobs anyway. So I was looking around and I went to work at an outdoor education school on the East Coast, which was just exactly my jam. No walls, lots of fun kids. I knew that international schools existed. I almost went to one once when my dad was going to move overseas. And I had friends that had been at them. And I decided to go to the fair. At that time, this is 1986, everybody went to the fairs. And I went to the University of Northern Iowa fair because I was living in Minnesota. And it was great. I thought I was going to go and get a job in Paris, and my mom would visit and we'd have lunch. And that was my vision. That was the extent of what I understood. And I got job offers from very different places than that. And I was pretty excited about actually going to Colombia and some other places. But in the lunch line, I met the head of the Ethiopia school, and I wasn't qualified for that school because you needed 3 years experience of teaching. And I had 1 year at an outdoor education school. And turns out that once he learned that I played college tennis, he was super interested in hiring me because the mixed doubles tournament at the Hilton in Addis was the only tournament he hadn't won in East Africa. So he was like, sure, you can teach English, but you have to play doubles with me. And so I left Iowa with a job, and I was 25 by the time I left. And that was it. Moved to a Soviet satellite state. My parents had a heart attack, and it was amazing.
Oh my, that sounds like the old boy network of, I remember with my first couple jobs. So holy cow.
Yep, that was it.
I think your brother kind of ended up going to Addis because he could play tennis and speak Spanish. So that was the way the recruiting went at that time in that place.
I suspect that it's very different from how things operate now.
There's still some of the insider track, but yes, probably not tennis per se. But it worked out. And there you were overseas for many years. So
Yeah, and met my husband the first week.
Yeah, right? Awesome. And with Rob and David both getting heavily recruited by people who are already teaching internationally. And I feel like that's our tribe. Everybody just, once you've drunk the Kool-Aid, everybody wants to just, that's part of the reason we have the show. Big part of the reason we have the show is to try to recruit and excite people about this whole international education gig. So I love it. Love it. So let's get into the show. And we do have a guiding question, though our format's going to be a little different than our usual. The question is, what are some lessons learned from your careers as international educators? And usually then we would have some follow-up questions, but this time what we're going to do is just, we have a few categories that we'd like to explore. And we know that people that are in the audience are going to be keen to hear some of the lessons learned from these veteran international educators. So let's start off looking at personal and professional lives. So just maybe some big picture highlights and or lowlights from your careers. And let's start with Rob. What do you got?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. We can start anywhere. One of the things that I'm a parent, as many people here may be listening, maybe they are not yet parents. And one of the things that I realized very quickly is that when I started teaching, and I started teaching grade 4 in 2004 in North Jakarta, Indonesia, and it was very, very evident to me that my classroom management skills were not the same as they were when I became a parent. So why do I say that? Because that desire to, be liked by students, you want to give them a great experience, and you want everything to be cohesive in the classroom. And so I learned, as I would say, a low point, that first and second year of teaching, without the discipline and the boundaries that you naturally learn as a parent. And I've seen this over the years between those teachers who are not parents and those teachers who are parents. It's night and day. And so I would say that was a massive lesson. And it just changed my experience completely. And so that was a huge lesson learned in the classroom. And then I would say too, from a, more exciting perspective, finding topics particularly that I was interested in. I found that becoming a teacher, because again, I left the business world where, life is about earning money for corporations. But in a classroom, when you are inspired and curious, and I found this surge of curiosity return to me, I was getting this from the students, all bets were off. I was fascinated by everything. And I think that excitement about being curious, being in the PYP, MYP programs too, that inquiry-based approach to everything was really exciting. So I say that was really one of my high points, and I've carried that through the years now.
Thank you. It really sounds like, as a beginning teacher and overseas, there were some things that really hit you and in good ways. I think they shaped you in positive ways. So that's great. How about yourself, Amy?
Well, I think probably the biggest highlight overall I'm thinking of, I was paid sometimes pretty well, not always pretty well, but I was paid to do a job I really love. I really love teaching English and then later theory of knowledge and IB psychology. But I really love every day in the classroom. Like today, I had a great day in the classroom and I got to do that with amazing students. Really, the students I've met overseas, beginning with my time in Ethiopia, I would just, as you were saying, Rob, just deeply inspiring. The whole thing was fascinating. It engaged me on so many levels. I didn't expect that I would find my career to be so rewarding. And it has been every day. And then to add that with going to work for many years, 15 years, going to work with my kids and my husband, my 3 kids, like we all get up in the morning, we all go to the same place, right? Like that's just been an absolute dream. That stands out. And then I think a more personal thing is that I think moving overseas, especially at age 25, into a very different context, I had to learn to see by the imperative of the situation I was in. I had to learn and be able to hold perspectives that I wasn't able to resolve. They just had to be in tension, and they've remained there in tension as I've added more suspended perspectives that I hold that I don't know how I hold them. I just have had to. And Audrey, when we were in Ethiopia, it was maybe the second year and the Gulf War broke out, the first Gulf War. And I was sitting in a classroom with a bunch of students whose countries were at war with one another. And we had to figure it out, right? And we did. And there was such a beautiful humanity. I felt such a local experience of international events I couldn't control, but we could each participate in our own way to peace. And that experience marked me forever. And the rest of my career has sort of been the same, albeit not so dramatic.
Absolutely. That's something I have also loved, is having students from so many different places with so many different perspectives and open to talking about some of these things, not just pretending like it's not there. So I agree with you there. How about David?
First of all, I want to say thank you to Rob and Amy for taking a bunch of my ideas before I could tell them. But I guess I got to start off with ditto. And first of all, I'll give you what came to my mind when I thought of this and lessons learned. And that is that starting off as a teacher, getting certified as a teacher in the US, in California, and working in California, I had certain ways that I thought things had to be done in the classroom and with curriculum. And then you go overseas and you're in these really nice, I was blessed to be in a couple of top-notch international schools. And I realized, wow, there are a lot of ways to do things than just the American way. I mean, some of the American way is good, but some of it's not so good. And so learning all those different approaches to teaching, and like Rob said, classroom management. And the fact that as I look out at my students, I was teaching elementary school. So I look out at my kids, and sometimes I would look out at my classroom and see a sea of faces from all corners of the world, so many different ethnicities and backgrounds. And that was just really neat, as well as the teaching staff, the professionalism and caliber of the teaching staff, my colleagues, was so high, which helped me raise my game and raise my bar. Amy, you mentioned you were in Addis Ababa when the Gulf War broke out. And for me, at my last school in Vietnam, when Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and I had some Russian students and some Ukrainian students in my class, and thinking, oh boy, how do I navigate this? Luckily, it was okay, and there were no problems. And I also want to piggyback on what Amy said about you get to go to your school with your whole family. And that's what we did when we were in Malaysia. We had a minivan, and mom and dad and our two kids would hop in the minivan and all drive to the same school. And it was just fantastic. It was so neat. Those are some things that come to my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the same themes are going to come across here. How about you, Dave?
All right. So I I'm merging the personal and professional together around the theme that Audrey and I speak to a lot, is community. And that's what we're hearing from our other panelists as well. That when maybe you're making that first move overseas and are a little fearful, who am I going to get connected to? I'm away from friends and family. And you're going to, in almost every case, walk into a community of educators, students, and then the one I'll focus on are the parents, just to kind of hit a different aspect of this. As a counselor, I really enjoyed meeting with parents. And a lot of times they were coming in because things weren't going so great, maybe with their kids. I was hoping to move in to be a wellness coach and be able to work with all parents, to help their kids thrive. But most of the time, it was under difficult circumstances. But to hear their stories and to pick up on how hard they're working and just how dedicated they were and are to their children. And many of them were maybe the first generation to go through university. Their parents had started a small workshop. It had grown into a factory. So that was very much a highlight. The low light, and this is one I've been working with a friend of the podcast. She and her husband right now are recruiting. And I'm just reminded that as much as Audrey and our guests, we love international education, but when you're out recruiting, it can be tough. And especially if you have a family, that you have to, in I think almost all cases, you have to say, I'm leaving, you sign a letter, and then you jump and you go whether to a fair or you're recruiting virtually. And it's super competitive for the higher level schools and probably even for the middle level schools. So there's trepidation and anxiety, and it's tough. I wouldn't really call it a low light, but I would call it a bump in the road. But for a lot of international educators, we're fearsome people. We enjoy kind of pushing the edge a little bit. That's why we went overseas, but it's not always easy. So that's what I would share. So Audrey, how about you?
I think that's a good point. I'm actually reading Doug Oda's book on transitions right now, and leaving is hard and being left is hard. And those are some times that stand out in my mind too, because one of my highlights is the fantastic variety of colleagues that you get to work with and the caliber and the passion. These teachers tend to be, it's a calling for them versus a job, and it's wonderful. Leaving people is hard, and having people leave you is really hard, partly because of the quality of those relationships. Amy, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that a little bit for a low light. I really feel what you're saying, Audrey, and especially after having left multiple schools, right? I was at 6 schools, and those relationships, right? It's not just the people, it's also that a part of me deeply integrated to those countries and to those cities. And there's a kind of sense of loss, maybe particularly poignant at the end of my career, that no one will ever know the full me. There's a piece that will get primed because I see an Ethiopian restaurant or I hear a Stromae song or, and I'm like, oh, that part of me. But the only people who know that part of me are the people I lived with in that place, right? And so I feel sometimes as this unreconcilable bit of parts, and there's a real sense of loss that I'm never my complete self.
Yeah, fair point. Thanks for bringing that up. And I would take that even that little bit further and we'll have another show on leaving international education and how hard that was for me. Very difficult because that's such a big part of my identity. For my low light, I was going to talk about the struggle that I had with, although the variety was great, but I changed jobs a lot and moved a lot. So all the change and transition has been amazing and a struggle at the same time. I've taught things as varied as health and PE, French, and computers and film. And sometimes I wasn't necessarily fully qualified to teach them. And so I worked very hard to try to get up to speed when I had to cover a design, technology, and yearbook class, which I was a sub, so a little bit less pressure there. And the teacher was amazing and had things figured out. And yet it was really challenging because it wasn't my area of expertise. So stretched me professionally and personally, of course, and then COVID hit during that time when I was doing that subbing in Rome. And so, yeah, a lot of challenges there for me professionally. But the variety and the fact that, a little bit like Amy with her tennis, but just having the ability to try things, I think that's an aspect of international schools as well that happens. You may not be fully qualified for something, but if you're a good fit for that school, maybe it's because of your spouse, maybe it's because they're just trying to fit that jigsaw puzzle of who they need on their staff. There's a lot of opportunities out there at the same time. So highlight and low light, the variety.
Big time.
Let's move on to the next one, Dave.
All right. So looking back, if each of you could share a strategy or two on how to make the most of one's time overseas, whether it's personal or professional, something to share really kind of for our newbies, people just starting to come overseas, what is a lesson strategy that can help them make the most of their time? And let's go with Amy on this one.
So this was true for me and my family. I don't know if it will apply to everyone's circumstances, but learning the language of the place that we lived was incredibly important for us. And we made future choices about where to move based on the acquisition that we were all having with Romance languages. And to me, having the language allowed me to get out of the school bubble and to access my cultural surroundings and really understand the experience of the way that people lived in that place, sort of as a different model of reality that I wanted access to and I wanted to understand and participate in. So it was great for our mental health to not feel like we were bound just by a community of foreigners. And it gave us tremendous freedom to explore. And I think also for me as a literature teacher and someone interested in philosophy and culture, I needed to have those experiences live. I needed to go to theater and speakers, and I needed to be able to watch films and go to events in that culture. And I needed to be able to access it through the local language if there wasn't an English speaking culture there. So for me, that's a number one. But like I said, sometimes it's not possible to maybe learn the language. But for me, that was a huge part of our family's experience.
Wow, that makes me think of, we've got a long list in our website of criteria and looking at schools. And I'm not sure if we have that one, but I'm definitely going to add that. The possibility that you could pick up the language to some degree definitely sounds like an important option and an important strategy for some people. So thank you for that. David, how about you?
Yeah, what Amy said about learning the language, that was another thing that was really important to me as well. And even though in Vietnam, Vietnamese language is next to impossible to learn, at least for me, but taking Vietnamese classes and mixing with the different Vietnamese teachers and the Vietnamese school, which is right down the street from my apartment, which was handy. And they would have little get-togethers. And once they invited me to come and play a song, I learned a song in Vietnamese. I play guitar and I try to sing. And that was just neat. And they put it up on YouTube and they use it for an ad on their website, the language school. So yeah, definitely learning the language is, I think, pretty key. And also when we're going to another country, we're foreigners and, we're ambassadors to our country. And if they see us making at least an effort to learn their language, I think that does wonders for how people perceive us there. Because I know Americans can have the reputation of only speaking English and they expect everybody else to learn English. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to learn the language. Unfortunately, in Malaysia, it was very difficult because they speak such good English there. In fact, I think in Malaysia, that's their common language because they have so many other languages. But I still picked up some in Malaysia. The other thing I wanted to mention is, Dave, you asked me about my experience playing in bands. And so I've always played in a band for the last 20 years. And so I've done that in both of my schools. And that was so great because I would get together with other teachers and we formed a band. And it's great because we're a bunch of foreigners playing in some foreign country. We're kind of like big fish in a small pond, and we could pretty much get a gig anywhere we wanted. And that was really neat, getting out and meeting people at the bars or restaurants and the local owners and so on. So playing music in a band was great. And I got to play for my colleagues because they would come, and also locals would show up, and they got a kick out of the Westerners up there playing music in their town. So those are a couple ways I get involved in the community.
And just to add a little bit more for the language, much of the local staff in a lot of these schools much of the support staff are local people. And just like you're saying, David, that if you can try to show an effort to speak the language, and then when the opportunities come up to go out for meals and things like that, for example, I've spent the last year in Thailand, and I constantly learn about the wrong way to be eating my rice and my curry. I mix them together, and I shouldn't be doing that. I was just corrected an hour ago about that from my partner. All right. Thank you, David. Rob, how about you?
I would echo what everybody said, the group. I would also say that travel was such an incredible experience. And in every country that we lived and worked in, we were out and about. And why is that a positive? Because I found once I traveled to all these places, we lived in the Middle East, we lived in Lebanon, we were all over Lebanon. We were in Baalbek, which was, very close to the Syrian border. This was during the Syrian war, and locals were up in arms saying, "You're crazy to do that." But we went, and we, drove through the Hezbollah guard gate, and it was exciting. And the reason the travel was so fantastic is that it allowed us to bond with the local teachers. And so in really every country that we traveled to and lived in, we spent a lot of time with local teachers as well as local families, and found that the relationship through our students, many parents wanted to be friends. And it was really interesting. Whether we were American or we had a hobby or we traveled together, it really was a very exciting way to learn the culture. And it all started with travel. So using the travel, and in fact, going to places that some people have never been to in their own country, is a great conversation starter and really was exciting and very fulfilling for us. And so travel was one way to do that. Learning the language, certainly, in Lebanon, we were learning Arabic from an ex-CIA trainer. And so you never know who you're going to meet, where or how you're going to do it. But the journey through language introduces you to all kinds of things. And I too worked and lived in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese language was very difficult. We learned some basics, but it really helped.
Excellent. All right, Audrey.
Well, to echo, I think it was David saying that all my answers have been taken. I wanted to talk also about just getting away from school, exploring the city and country, learning the language to facilitate that, and meeting people. One thing that I found really interesting, my first week in Ethiopia, I learned a lot of Amharic from my Zabanya, which was the guy who guarded our little house compound. And it was really fun. We just had some chats on the stoop in the evening, and the dual opportunity to meet people and learn the language is just something that I've always capitalized on. Get out into the streets and try to talk to people, and as you guys have expressed, they appreciate that, and it just makes your experience so much richer, and learning the culture as well. So I would echo the language and culture piece, and also the travel piece, because that's how you really gain some perspective on what it's like to live in that country and eat in that country, Dave. It's so easy to be an expat and just dip your toe in and not really live in the country. If you really think about it and stand back and take some perspective, why are you there? Why are you in this other country if not to enjoy and learn about the local flavors and language and people?
Yeah, food could be a whole other podcast.
Exactly. All right. Well, I'll take a shot at this, and we're going to have a question in just a moment, or a category of breaking out of the bubble. And we've mentioned that's what we're kind of hitting on, but we're going to expand a little bit more. So I'm going to talk about the bubbles within the big bubble, the divisions, elementary, middle, and high school, and how you can become your own little private Idahos. I'm in Idaho right now, making that connection. So how can you connect to other people within your school? Lots of different ways that you can do that. One could be, if you're like an elementary teacher, you could be coaching middle school or high school, or you're a high school teacher coaching the middle school, lower school. And then there's so many different activities, sports activities, to people just organizing around hobbies like book clubs, things like that. For example, back to Vietnam, we played ultimate frisbee, and Rob the gazelle, I would try to chase him, and I never could catch him playing ultimate. And then Mr. D. Ross, Coach D. Ross, would let me come up to his varsity volleyball and let me practice with them from time to time. So that's the way I broke up my little bubbles within that school, for example. Amy, what do you have?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that's true even if they aren't official activities that are already organized, right? I'm a yoga teacher and have been for a really long time. And, I wasn't really planning on getting paid for it, although sometimes I was. But I would just sort of say, okay, here's a yoga class. This is for parents. Here's a yoga class for teachers. I would do it before school. I've taught yoga to students. I think it's the same case with the ultimate frisbee or the band or whatever it is. If you have something to offer that creates a little community that you can sustain over time, people are going to show up, and then you're going to meet a whole bunch of people through that. And, sometimes that leads to other things. I'm also a yoga therapist and see clients privately for mental health. And I met a local person who I was teaching yoga to, and she owned a physiotherapy studio. And I ended up working there a few times a week with her clients who had been in car accidents, who were struggling with traumas of various physical and mental sorts. And I think it's that case that we all know. You just sort of hang up your shingle and you don't know where it's going to lead, but it's definitely going to lead somewhere to something. And I've found that to be true through teaching yoga, but it could be really anything.
I'm really enjoying the panel aspect of this and that people are jumping in and adding on to questions. I think we really can learn a lot from each other, and there's just such a rich knowledge base here and experience base. So it's just fantastic. Did anyone have anything else on this topic?
I do want to add, and I wanted to call out to Scott Rogel, who was in Hong Kong with me, middle school band teacher, and now he's in Bahrain. Oh, he's in Vietnam too. All three places he was involved in setting up bands like David. And I just thought that was so cool. And then on hanging up the shingle, it's such a movement now for so many educators that have an area of expertise to go to some of the professional development opportunities and share that. And then they kind of move up the ladder to then maybe they go and do a school visit. And eventually, who knows, maybe they become a consultant. So I would add that as another strategy for people coming overseas.
Could I jump in real quick? Amy, you mentioned about how you're not sure what you'll end up doing. You have a skill. Could I maybe use it at the school? And in Malaysia, I spoke enough Spanish to teach Spanish. I was teaching third grade and the Spanish teacher left for elementary. I said, I can do it. They said, okay, can you do this and this? I said, yeah. I said, all right, you're a Spanish teacher. And so I taught 5 years elementary Spanish, and it was awesome. I loved it. Elementary Spanish, beginning Spanish, yeah. So, and that was just from having some language skills and speaking up when I heard that there was an opportunity.
I love it. Echoing everything here, I actually leveraged my marketing skills and my background in sustainability and actually served on the board. I assisted some people on the board of directors in one of the schools to help them do some fundraising for the school. And so I was helpful on that front. And I found that was a great way to meet parents at the school and then to meet people in different schools. One other thing we did too, around the theme we all have on food, is I was teaching fifth grade. This was in Zimbabwe. And we invited a woman who cooked Indian food. And we started inviting all the teachers from the different schools. And so outside of our fifth grade, compound, we had high school teachers and middle school teachers all coming to join in on Friday lunches. And it was a blast. And it was a great way, one day a week, to connect with everyone because the campus was so big and we were all so spread out. So lots of little fun ways. Your love of food, your background, whether it's teaching yoga or playing in a band, all of that is fantastic. And they're just creative ways to get out and about. I would also say, too, that my wife and I built a blog in one of the schools where, there's all this incredible knowledge and experience that everybody has. From traveling, from going to local restaurants. David Ross knew his restaurants in Ho Chi Minh. He totally did. And if you don't capture that information, it's hard to share it, particularly as a new teacher. And so that's something that we tended to always look at schools. What kind of knowledge management, what kind of data capture has been happening here? Because there's so much. If you want to start in a new school in a new country, you want to kind of have an idea, where do I get started? And so it's wonderful, particularly with the more seasoned teachers, to have that documented somewhere. So we felt really good about doing that. But that is something to do, is to collect information or to look for who's holding that repository and get connected. That's a great way to get out there.
So we've really, this is what's going to happen with the panel. We've gotten into more of a question about getting out of the bubble and ways to do that. So let's explore that a little further before heading on to our next question. So Amy, you had something to say.
Yeah, I was also going to say that linking back to that idea of having a skill, and also if you know some of the language, right? Or if you're in an English-speaking community, there are definitely ways to make an impact through local organizations, right? And when I was in Rio, I just happened to meet someone who was a parent at a different school who had a program that was preparing high school graduates from the favelas to try to take the college entrance exams, but they were woefully underprepared, right? But my husband and I both spoke Portuguese, and so I could talk to them and teach them when they needed to know for the English portion of the exam. And my husband taught them math in Portuguese, which was amazing. So, it was one night a week, and we were just in a completely different slice of Rio life than we would ever have been able to access. And we wouldn't have been able to set that up ourselves either. But we piggybacked on an organization that was looking for skills that we had, and they did all of the work and held the whole container. We just sort of slotted in and taught our classes. And it was a safe, wonderful, really fulfilling way to give something back to people who are very different from our student population.
That is just so cool. I love that. What an opportunity. You just never know. Serendipity happens. All right, David, you had something else?
Yes, I did. And, the more we talk, the more I realize there's so many things to talk about here. Things keep popping in my head, I'm sure for you guys as well. But with the theme of getting out of the bubble, I'm reminded of when I fell into this coaching position, coaching middle and high school boys volleyball. I didn't realize that we were going to be playing all these other international schools in the area. And not only that, in neighboring countries. And next thing I know, they're putting me and my whole team on planes going to Thailand and Cambodia and Laos and traveling within Vietnam. And it was just so neat. I got to meet other coaches. I got to go visit other schools. I saw so many other schools without even, it was a paid trip, and we got to stay in nice hotels, but you still got to manage your students. But coaching sports really opened up a big window for me.
Nice. Yeah, my husband actually set up sports leagues among international schools. If there wasn't one, Mark was like, all right, well, let's put one together. So he did that in Addis. It was a little tougher in Riyadh. There weren't really any other international schools that you could tap into, but he also did it in, I guess it was in Rome. He didn't set it up, but he was the one contacting the referees and setting up matches and things like that. So the league was there, but it was very loosely done. And so he was very active in that. Anyway, when it isn't there, you can build it yourself. How about Dave? You said you had some more to add.
So I'll piggyback on Amy just to say, do try to find the areas where you can volunteer. And then that connects to what Rob was saying. Find out who is the person that is capturing the information. Hopefully there's a blog, or hopefully there's a website where people are saying the doctors, pharmacies, shopping, cultural opportunities, and try to reach out to local staff on where you can volunteer if possible, if language is not a barrier for you. The second thing, connecting to the culture, and Amy was speaking about maybe going to performances. For me, it's art. And Vietnam is an incredibly rich culture, for example, with art. So what I would say is get out there, hit the sidewalks, take your cameras, and just take in as much as you can and see what you're interested in, but be ready for things you might not even know exist, right? You might become the person who loves to take pictures of windows in older buildings or things like that, and you start an Instagram account or whatever it is. So find those cultural avenues, and whether you have an interest or not, and maybe grow an interest if you don't. So that's my addition for getting out of the bubble.
Rob, did you want to add any more final thoughts?
I think that there are things, as long as you are passionate about something, that passion is going to be appreciated by your students, by the parents, by other teachers, or by local staff. I remember when we were in Lebanon, we'd be in the lunchroom and we were chastised for combining our leftovers, which was pasta, with tabbouleh salad, which was a huge no-no, a massive no-no. And what that led to was local staff inviting us to their house to show us how to properly cook. And we actually went to some local markets, the best markets, which were on every corner, of course. No, this is the best. But it was fantastic. Getting outside of the school, away from students and parents, and just, spending time with local staff, seeing it through their eyes. It was really fun.
Awesome. Yeah, there are all kinds of ways, all kinds of things you can do, and supported by curiosity, passion, a desire to learn the language, and then just opportunities that come up.
All right, let's move on. We're all parents and have raised our children partially or mostly overseas. So let's take a look at a tip or two that you would share with folks who have a family and how you can support your children in the school and outside the school, whether it be learning or just personal growth or whatever it might be. David, let's go with you.
What comes to mind there is when establishing yourself in a new city, a new country, and a new school. As parents, you're dealing with a lot of new things. I mean, new language, a new school, new surroundings, new culture, and all this is to keep in mind that your children are also going through the same adjustment. I have two kids, a boy and a girl, and I think they adapted pretty well. We went into or started at two different schools. We didn't go to quite as many schools as some of you, but for the two schools where we were, they did manage to adapt pretty well. But in hindsight, I probably should have been thinking, they're probably going through the same adjustment as me. I probably had a harder time than they did, but it all worked out in the end. That's the main thing that comes up to mind for me.
Just grow that awareness. And what I would say as a counselor, add in structures for check-ins for everyone and lay some communication techniques where everyone can share what's going on. There's no shaming, there's supporting, you're active listening with your children. There's a whole list of things that you want to do.
Could I add something real quick there? You just made me think of it, Dave, what you just said there. And that is that being at the same school where my children are, we're all at the same campus, like we were talking about earlier. And it's great because I see my kids walking down the hall and I know they're friends. Their friends might even be in my class. Heck, my children were even in my own class. And so when it came to them building friendships, I knew the kids that they were friends with. So that was a great way to kind of not keep tabs, but in a way keep tabs and kind of know what my kids are up to and make sure they're staying on the straight and narrow, as it were.
Thanks for that. Rob, how about you?
Excellent point, Mr. Dave. Building on that, what was wonderful was having your own kids friends in your class and knowing the curriculum they're going through and knowing the books they're reading and knowing the teachers, really knowing the teachers outside of the classroom. And so that is, for people thinking about doing this overseas, you really become a family in many ways. Some schools are big, some are small, and I think many of us have taught at both. The real advantage is particularly watching your kids and all of your students as they grow up in the same school, whether you're in middle school or elementary or what have you, kind of having that path and sharing that between your kids, but with your kids' friends. And that's really powerful. And I think a really wonderful experience. All of the struggles with technology, you can really get your hands around that if you know the technology director. And so there are all of these behind the scenes advantages that you get as a parent/teacher that really makes it positive. I'd say on the flip side too, your kids get to share. I remember my son Sam was playing ultimate frisbee with all of us in Vietnam. And so that was really powerful. So I'll just end with, you get to share in what your kids are doing as students. You get to share with their friends and their parents. And you're all part of that school community, having a lot of experiences that I'll just say I never had when I was in the business world. I was on planes. I was never around. And so what a dichotomy to have that experience 24/7 with your kids. So it was very positive.
So true. So true.
Thanks. Amy?
I was thinking a lot about this question because now my children are not children anymore. And we're at the end of the cycle and my youngest just graduated from college. So I have a lot of different pieces of this, but thinking if there's anyone out there who is hesitating about going abroad with their kids, I would just say that they're so much more resilient than you could ever imagine that they will be. They're going to be great. My son comes home one day and said, "Mom, I'm in Catalan class now." And I said, "You're in Catalan? How did that happen?" He said, "Well, because I'm in the regular Spanish class with the Spanish kids. They go to Catalan 3 times a week." And I was like, awesome, or looking at my daughter doing equestrian lessons on these giant horses and she couldn't understand a word that the instructor was saying, but she figured it out. And you just put them in the situation and they're going to be great. However, that being said, at the same time, there are going to be vulnerabilities that you don't expect and that you haven't considered. And I really agree with Dave with your idea about you've got to watch them and you have to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on, especially if your child has any sort of difference that might not be well supported in that school in the same way that it might be in the US or Canada or whatever, right? So my daughter's queer, and there are not that many schools that we could be at with a queer teenage daughter, right? My oldest son is gifted in all the asymmetrical ways that we sometimes see gifted kids, and he needed particular kinds of advancement opportunities or he was going to lose his mind. So while I believe that if you throw a bunch of people together, we will eventually learn to see and respect each other's differences and find common humanity, if it's not at a mission-driven school with trained adults who can hold that container, there's not always great things that are happening under the surface. You need good counseling team, you need good administrators, and you need a school that has very clear stated values so that you know how well your child is going to be able to fit into that school. Yeah. So that's what I was thinking. Sorry, that was long. And then one other little piece is just that from a psychology perspective, living in another country is exhausting. You never know quite what's going on, right? 75% understanding at any time, right? And that means they're going to need more downtime and more sleep than they would if they were in a monocultural or monolingual environment.
I'm glad that you brought up the differences that your children might exhibit and how will they be supported. And not just supported, but will your child thrive at that next school? And so I'm going to do a huge generalization. There are parts of the world, and on the positive side, where the kids are very driven, and part of it is parental pressure, grandparent pressure. And the high school experience can just be a giant machine, and you are expected to do a certain curriculum. And we left overseas teaching before that happened. And I know one of my sons wouldn't have thrived there. The other one could have handled it. And that wouldn't have been a good thing. So I think that's so important. And to have conversations, and Audrey, you might want to speak to this with your last couple moves, well, one move, of getting your children's voice involved in the process when you lay out the possibilities of what the schools could have. And I always come back to really writing down what you want in a school, because when you're in that interview and then you get the offer, you feel all this pressure. But if you have it all written down of what's going to work for us and what isn't going to work, that can be really, really helpful. The other thing I would add, and this is a little bit more what Amy's saying too, one thing I notice about my sons is they're problem solvers. They're independent. They know how to handle themselves in an airport. There's so many kind of life skills that they're going to pick up in school, but also out, because in most cases, you're going to be hopefully in safe places, and that isn't always the case. But your children are going to have the opportunity to be very independent in some places. And I think that's fantastic. We talk about it in the U.S., we've taken away the childhood of a couple generations now. The kids just don't have opportunities to get out in parks and ride their bikes and all that stuff. So that's my 2 cents. All right, Audrey, what do you say?
Well, thanks for teeing me up about the idea of getting your kids' input if you're making a move, I think is important, and talking to them about it and what your thinking is and why you're considering making a move and how they feel about it. The one you're alluding to was our move from Singapore to Chile. We had actually talked to the kids multiple times about, we're thinking about making a move. What do you guys think? And it was interesting because both of them at one point in time said, oh, why would we leave here? This is a great place. And then later on, when our son was graduating and our daughter said, I would like to try something different. How about South America? So we said, oh, well, we didn't know that we were going to be limited in our options, but let's do it. Let's try. And fortunately, that's when we were able to move to Chile. So that worked out well for her. I think it's really important to spend time on transitions, as has already been kind of said, that you be intentional about it. Provide some time, provide listening ears for what can be a really hard time and be sensitive to that. No shame, no judgment, as somebody already mentioned. Hear them out, give them the space, listen to their concerns. And then also, I would say, for me anyway, when we had kids, our original plan was, man, let's go 3 to 5 years and then try something different. We want to see the world, etc. And then we decided that the kids hadn't necessarily chosen that. So then we decided to stay put for longer times at two of our schools while the kids were growing up, to give them the opportunity to experience not moving around quite as much. So that's something I think is also important to consider carefully, in addition to, as has been said, thinking about where you're going to and how will your kids be supported in that environment. When you're getting excited to take that job, it isn't just about you. You have to also factor in what will work for them, and particularly if they do have learning differences or social differences. So just wrapping up what everybody has already said as well. So talking about change and transitions, let's talk about what kind of different pathways you might have followed during your careers. Amy, let's start with you.
So I think it's been said a couple of times about how sometimes there's just an opportunity and you end up making some shift into something that you never thought that you were going to do. And I found that throughout my career. So within teaching English, I taught in the IB program. I've taught all of the Englishes in the IB program at all the diploma program levels and became an examiner, right? I didn't even know such a thing existed. And then I was teaching English at one of the schools and they said, hey, our kids are asking for IB psychology. We know that you studied psychology. And I was like, yep, I'll do it. And so then I just transitioned into that, and I was teaching theory of knowledge for 20 years and became an examiner with that. I didn't even know it existed, right? And then I had an opportunity when my kids were a little bit older to go part-time, and I was living in Brussels, but I traveled every 6 weeks to London for 4 days and became a somatic therapist. And my school allowed me to do that, gave me a sub, knowing that when I came back with that training, it would feed back into the school in some way, right? And so I was in counseling sessions, and it's just things that I never dreamed of, but an opportunity flew past and I grabbed it. And I've found the schools to be nothing but supportive and visionary in allowing me to pursue different things. And I think the other thing that has changed the trajectory of my career was that my husband, after our job in Ethiopia, continued to want to go into administration. And he had been an administrator in New York, very low level, but the school really supported him. He started going to summer programs and got his principal certificate, got to be assistant principal, then principal, and he's been ahead of school now for a really long time. But I think we just both found that within this career that started out being, hey, I'm going to go be a teacher and work in Ethiopia, it's become this incredibly varied, rich, layered experience that has never left me bored or wanting for new opportunities ever along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we all have those tendencies to want to try new things. And I wonder what it would be like. And no judgment, but just for me, it would have been difficult to be in the same school, in the same district, teaching the same subject for, 30 years or what have you. The change is inspiring. How about yourself, David?
I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. Actually, Amy kind of touched on it a little bit. And it's not so much about a pathway I took during my career. It's when I left my career in the form of a sabbatical where you resign, you completely disconnect, and you take time off that's not career driven. We decided, when I say we, I mean our family, in 2006, that's when we did our first sabbatical. We said, hey, let's, we've been saving our pennies. We can take a sabbatical. So we took a 6-month sabbatical. That was when we were in Los Angeles, and we were able to return to our jobs. So we took the 6 months. We said, let's get out and see what else is out there in the world. And then we found jobs in Malaysia. And then we we rented our house and left. But boy, knowing that we had the jobs waiting for us was good. But Our second sabbatical that happened in 2012, we completely resigned. We didn't have any job waiting for us. We tried to ask for it, but they weren't offering sabbaticals at the time. So we said, all right, let's just go for it. And we resigned for a whole year. We left and we biked through Europe. We went from Amsterdam. We rode bikes and camped and homeschooled our kids from Amsterdam all the way down to Rome. It took us about 3 months. And we homeschooled our kids. We gave them some math and some reading. But other than that, every day was school for them because they were seeing all sorts of neat stuff, cultural things, museums, things like that. So I can't stress enough and encourage enough the idea of taking a sabbatical and completely disconnecting from your career and seeing where your brain goes, because it's been great. And now I'm kind of on my third sabbatical. This has been about 2.5 years so far, and I may just stay on sabbatical. But yeah, to disconnect from your job, completely disconnect is great. And I recommend it.
Fantastic. I guess retirement is a lifelong sabbatical, you could say.
Yeah, kind of.
So let's move on with Rob. What do you got to say about pathways?
Well, I have a different background. I think that both David and Amy in that I actually thrive on change. And so why is that important? Well, to me, sitting in the same chair doing the same thing is just impossible. And there's some people like me and other people not. And so we did bounce around, and I bounced around in careers, and I'm now in a new career. One thing I did want to say is when we did our first overseas thing together with my wife and I, we returned back to the US after 2 years in Indonesia. And I started a new career based on my experience in Indonesia. It was so polluted. Jakarta, if any of you have been there, is a very polluted place. It's in the top 5. And so that experience inspired me to learn and do something about the planet. So I moved and started my own consulting firm and kind of moved up in the ranks. And then I was traveling too much, and we adopted 2 kids, and I was never seeing them. And so we decided it is time to make the change again. And so one thing I wanted just to say to the audience is that once you really get a taste for overseas teaching and all of the things that come with it, as Amy was saying, it will never leave you. And I would say I've had some of the most memorable life experiences in those roles. You know, you're touching so many students and their parents and their families, their extended families, and then all of the people that you're meeting, not just the local staff, but their families. And so all of that really shapes you. So I would agree with Dave on the sabbatical. I've taken a couple of sabbaticals, and it's life-changing. Whether, by the way, that's a voluntary sabbatical or an involuntary sabbatical, being in the business world isn't always as organized, let's say, as the 9 months of school and then the nice 2 or 3 months of summer vacation. So I think it is important to take a little bit of time off just to reflect. And those summer months are for that, I would say. So that's that.
Yeah, I think it's always good to step back and get some perspective and be intentional about what's next. Dave, how about you?
So I'm having a lot of gratitude listening to the 4 of you share such rich experiences and modeling that profile of an international educator. All 3 of you can handle change, and you're up for new experiences. And some of you, well, David, come up with just very creative, the idea that twice you took sabbaticals. That's just so cool. And to give that to your children and to yourselves. And then, Rob, you just kind of hit on mine right there. When you get a sabbatical that you really weren't planning on. So my share is that we were recruiting and we didn't write down what our goes and no-goes were. And we wanted this specific city and specific school, which you really shouldn't do. Got to be open to all the opportunities. And there was only a position for my wife. And we took the job without me really thinking, can I not work? And I was at that stage in my career in IT, coming from a powerhouse school, HKIS, coming to a school that was trying to catch up. And it was very painful and very difficult. So I guess my message is be ready to do an intentional sabbatical or intentional, like Amy's saying, trying different things. Yeah, I'm always up to teach anything. But if it's the idea that you're recruiting as in a partnership and one person isn't going to be able to work, there's so much loss, general loss, and then specifically the loss of your identity. And at least my experience is it's very difficult to feel a part of that community. And maybe, Audrey, you can speak to maybe we're going to do it anyway, your experience part-timing. But that's one I would just say, you and your partner make a decision before you go in. Is one of you willing to not work? And there are all the financial parts, there's the identity part, but that's a big thing to have an agreement on before you start your next recruiting round. That's my share.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to think those things through. I've had so many different pathways. I took a sabbatical in a way that I was finishing my master's and we moved back to the States for a year. And boy, that was a toughie for the kids. And also for Mark, teaching in the US was tough. But after having been overseas and being able to have so much agency over what's going on, to have to fit yourself into a system that's already there and has all its quirks was tough for him. But for me, just trying different jobs. The master's I was taking was in technology as well. So then I wanted to branch into that. And every time we changed schools, I changed jobs, which looking back, maybe I put myself through the ringer. But I love the challenge. I love the changes, trying different things and stretching myself. And so I would say the opportunities are there. Like Amy said, they fly by, grab them with both hands and just try them out and see what happens. And you can always change your path again if you want to. And I've been very blessed to have lots of different opportunities to try different pathways. And, right now, as Dave was indicating, I've been a trailing spouse for a while now, and it's cool in the sense that you don't have as much pressure with the jobs. The subbing has been fun and interesting. I've tried different things that way. It's also hard because you really aren't automatically kind of part of the teaching community in the same way that you are when you're a teacher. So it's just a different perspective, and good and bad come with it, like with anything. But I would say definitely try different things, be open to the opportunities and the possibilities, and just lean into the fact that at these kind of schools, things will come up.
Yes, they will. So as we wind down here, with the knowledge, we're going to do a second show on leaving international education and where that takes us. Each of us has different stories. Keeping it focused on lessons learned. Let's do a final share. It could be for someone who's looking to come overseas, or someone who's a veteran, maybe towards the end of their career, or maybe the middle, whatever it might be. What's a final share that you would like to communicate? David, what do you have to say?
I just know that when I shifted from teaching in Los Angeles, moving from there as a teacher to teaching overseas, my quality of life raised so much in that my teaching environment, my colleagues I worked with, the students I had, the quality of life and the excitement of a new exotic city, different culture. It was exciting. And my quality of life was just so much higher. And unfortunately, there are a lot of teachers teaching in public schools in the US, and they're not really content. And I wish I could tell them all, gosh, go try to teach overseas. And man, you'll love it. And for a teacher, I just think it's a great gig.
It's a great gig. Well said. All right, Rob.
So many things to say. I would say do it, take the plunge. Life is about challenge. And, it's so interesting now that so many of the theories about people being really successful are people that are willing to accept failure, to embrace a challenge, not as a negative, and change, not as a negative, but as a positive, because we grow through change. We grow from taking on challenges. That's why it's such a small percentage of people that actually do this. I mean, you're leaving your friends, you're leaving your family, you're leaving everything you know, and you're taking a plunge to a new country, a new culture, a new language. The food is different. The air quality could be crazy. Animals you've never seen before. And of course, a government that might not be to your liking. So all of that is really worth it. And I'll say that one of the things that I really have gained, a lesson learned, we're very close to the 2024 election. And having a perspective of being outside of the country of your origin is so important, So many people, and again, I'm an American, so many Americans don't have that perspective. And that is one huge thing you gain. And so I would just say, opening your eyes, opening your mind is really, I think, one of the best benefits of this experience. And now that I'm back in the US, there are some pros and there's some cons, but having that perspective is really powerful. So I'll leave you with that.
I appreciate that. Focus on the perspective for sure. All right, Amy.
Rob, when you were just saying something about it being an election year, this memory that I hadn't considered for so long just popped into my head about my son on the radio in Madrid talking about his feelings about the fact that Obama had just won the election. He was like 11 years old, and they had called the school and said, "Do you have any American kids there who speak Spanish?" And they're like, "Have them come down to the studio." Oh, that was funny. So, I'm thinking, if you're listening to this podcast, you're already hooked and you're going to do it. So just do it, right? If you've already gotten to that point, you're in. But I'd also say that you really don't need to worry about where it's all going. This is me looking back after 30 years. You don't have to know where it's going. It's really just that cliche of the first step. And I think it's very much like the metaphor of you can't see the other doors until you walk through the first door, right? You have to walk through the door and then you see, oh my gosh, there's all these other doors, but they're not accessible to you until you do the first door. So you just need to do the first door. The other thing is for people who are worried about, if I go overseas, then how am I going to come back? We came back. When I was pregnant and living in Rio, my husband was doing his PhD at the University of Minnesota. We came back and we stayed for 9 years. We didn't know what was going to happen. That was all new stuff. And I ended up working at a wonderful private school in Minneapolis and had no trouble getting a job. And my husband ended up teaching at the university and doing a whole bunch of different things. You don't have to think of it as being stuck on some path. It's wildly varied and you have a huge amount of agency, sabbaticals and coming back to the States. There's no single path, but you just do have to take that first step to find out what's out there.
Well said. All right, I just want to share my thanks. This is, as I told the fellas, a show I've been waiting for a couple of months, and it's been wonderful. And thank you for taking the time and sharing so many of your stories and insights and wisdom. It's pretty powerful. I know our audience will appreciate it. So I'm going to hand things off to Audrey.
I want to say thanks as well to you guys for taking the time and such a rich knowledge base, sharing all your experiences. And audience, you can hear the variety of experiences that these people have enjoyed. And also, just to add my little bit about going overseas initially, it might feel like a big leap of faith, and it is. You will be supported at the other end. I'll never forget Amy's husband, Lee, meeting me at the airport in Addis. I was very anxious, and I just felt so welcomed and supported by that. And you're immediately pulled into the community. So I echo what people have said, just go for it. We like to say in the international education community, anybody can do something for 2 years. No big deal. Like Amy said, you can always flux in, flux out. It's all good. So you people have really brought so much perspective and knowledge to this show, and it's so fun having a panel and variety of input. So thank you so, so much for taking the time. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Can I just jump in and say, I wish that there was a podcast like this that I could have listened to before I jumped in. So I can't wait till the next one because I love the conversation, and thank you for having me.
Yay.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I'm going to go look at the job postings.
It's awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Hi, everyone. It's Audrey.
And David.
We're so happy and grateful that you're here listening to us. We really want to thank the people who follow us on Apple Podcasts and have written reviews. We appreciate you guys.
We hope to increase our reach within the international education community, so we are asking for your help. Please follow our show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, or your favorite podcast listening app. We have posted instructions on how to do this on our podcast page.
If you like our show and the services we aim to provide, please rate us and write a review. This will help us grow our audience and support our mission of sharing the joys of international teaching with as broad a group as possible. We'd love to increase those numbers in Africa, South America, and Australia.
So thanks again for listening and for all your support. Let's recruit as many teaching peeps as possible to travel,
Teach,
and connect with us.